In this video, we're going to be taking a deep look at the disturbing truth hiding behind South Park lore. Let's begin. South Park has been on the air for 28 seasons. Think about that for a second. 28 seasons, that means 4 boys in a small Colorado town have been sitting in the 4th grade since 1997. And in that time, the world around them has gone through multiple presidencies, a financial collapse, a global pandemic, the rise and fall of social media empires, and whatever the hell NFTs were supposed to be. These kids have lived through all of it, and they haven't aged a day. Now on the surface, South Park looks like crude cartoon comedy, paper cutout animation, fart jokes, and a kid who dies every episode. But underneath all of that, Trey Parker and Matt Stone quietly built one of the most disturbing, interconnected mythologies in television history. We're talking Lovecraftian cults, government portals to alternate dimensions, a town-wide conspiracy to cover up a child's patricide, and an immortality curse that might be holding the entire timeline together. Tonight, we're going to pull that mythology apart, theory by theory, episode by episode. And what we find hiding beneath the surface is darker than anything the show has ever said out loud. So get comfortable, this is going to take a while. Let's start with the one character whose entire existence is built on a joke that turned out to be something much, much worse. Kenny McCormick. Every South Park fan knows the routine. Kenny dies, Stan says, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny." Kyle says, "You bastards." And then Kenny shows up in the next episode like nothing happened. For the first several seasons of the show, this was treated as a running gag. A dark, funny, recurring bit that the creators used whenever they wanted to kill someone off for shock value or comedy. But here's what most casual viewers don't realize. The show eventually explained why Kenny keeps coming back, and the explanation is genuinely horrifying. This theory, which was confirmed within the show itself across the Coon trilogy in season 14, had actually been building in fan communities for years before that. Fans on Reddit and South Park forums had been piecing together clues since the early 2000s, noticing that certain episodes dropped hints about Kenny's condition that went way beyond a simple cartoon gag. The biggest early clue came in season 4, episode 5, Cartman joins Nambla, where after Kenny dies, his mother gives birth to another Kenny almost immediately. His parents don't grieve. They don't even seem particularly surprised. His mom just says, "I guess we'll have to try again." That line sat there for years, waiting for context. And when the context finally arrived, it was worse than anyone expected. In season 14, episode 11, Coon 2 Hindsight, the boys are playing superheroes. Cartman is the Coon. The other boys are Coon and friends. And one of them, Mysterian, wears a hood and speaks in a gravelly voice, and nobody knows who he is. The big reveal comes when Human Kite accidentally blurts out, "Dude, Kenny, chill out," and just like that, Mysterian's identity is confirmed. But that's not the important part. The important part is what Kenny says next. Captain Hindsight, another character in the episode, is complaining about being burdened by his powers. And Kenny, as Mysterian, tells him that he has no right to complain. Because Kenny has been cursed with something far worse. He explains that every time he dies, he simply wakes up in his bed the next day, completely restored to full health. His body is whole. His injuries are gone. And here's the part that makes it genuinely disturbing. Nobody remembers that he died, even if they were standing right there watching it happen, even if they were the ones who caused it. The next morning, they have no memory of his death at all. Kenny is the only one who remembers, every single time. That means Kenny experiences every death with full consciousness, every burning, every crushing, every dismemberment, every explosion. He feels all of it, and then he wakes up knowing that nobody will ever acknowledge what just happened to him. He can't talk about it. He can't process it with anyone. He is completely alone with the memory of dying over and over and over again while the rest of the world just moves on. He tells Captain Hindsight that he is the last person who should be talking to him about curses. And the weight behind that line is devastating once you understand what Kenny carries with him every single day. But the show doesn't stop there. In the very next episode, Season 14, Episode 12, Mysterion Rises, Kenny starts digging into where this curse came from. He goes home to confront his parents and he finds them smoking crack, which honestly is about what you'd expect. He asks them about their involvement with something called the Cult of Cthulhu, and his parents admit they were part of it. But they claim they only joined for the free beer. Kenny doesn't find this very hard to believe. So Kenny, along with the rest of Coon and friends, goes to an actual Cult of Cthulhu meeting in South Park. And when they get there, they recognize familiar faces in the crowd. Mr. Adler, the shop teacher, the goth kids, the Star Trek nerds from school. But what catches Kenny's attention is a chant the cult members are reciting. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die. That line comes straight from H.P. Lovecraft's mythology. It's from the Necronomicon. And the moment Kenny hears it, he realizes this chant is directly connected to whatever was done to him. Things go bad quickly after that. The cult leader shows up and tells the goth kids that Cthulhu himself has ordered Mysterion to be disposed of. A fight breaks out. The cult leader grabs a switchblade from one of the Kindergoth kids and stabs Kenny directly in the chest. He dies right there in the alley. And then, inevitably, Kenny wakes up in his bed the next morning, unharmed, restored, alone with the memory. His friends show up at his door asking why he ran away the night before, completely unaware that he was just murdered. Season 14, Episode 13, Coon vs. Coon and Friends takes it even further. Kenny tries to prove his power to his friends by shooting himself in the head right in front of them. They're all distraught, they're screaming. And then the next day, nobody remembers. So he does it again at the end of the episode. He shoots himself a second time. And the camera cuts away from the boys' horrified faces and lands on Kenny's mother. She jolts awake, screaming in pain, and yells, "It's happening again." The next shot shows her placing a baby in a crib, dressed in the familiar orange parka. And she says to her husband with this quiet, tired regret, "We never should have gone to that stupid cult meeting." That's it. That's the origin. Kenny's parents attended a Cult of Cthulhu meeting, presumably while pregnant with Kenny, and whatever ritual or exposure happened there cursed their son with a cycle of death and rebirth that has been running ever since. His mother gives birth to him again every time he dies. She knows it, she feels it, and she's been going through it for as long as the show has been on the air. The curse didn't just affect Kenny, it trapped his entire family in a loop. His parents are poor, broken, substance-addicted people who keep watching their son die and come back, and nobody outside the family even notices. Earlier in the Coon trilogy, when Mysterion visits the goth kids to learn more about his condition, they show him texts from the Necronomicon that state an immortal can only be killed by another immortal. This means Kenny's curse isn't just a gift of resurrection, it's a prison. There is effectively no way for him to die permanently unless another immortal being intervenes. He is trapped in an infinite loop of death, rebirth, and forgetting, and the show makes it clear that he hates it. He doesn't want this power. He considers it a curse, not a blessing. And the loneliness of being the only person who remembers is eating him alive. The post-COVID movies released decades later show us what happens when Kenny finally grows up. Adult Kenny became a scientist. He spent his entire adult life researching time travel and the origins of the pandemic, trying desperately to fix the timeline and save his friends. And he died. The COVID variant that killed him was literally named after him. The Kenny McCormickran variant. Even in a future where he escaped childhood, escaped the 4th grade, and built a career, death still followed him. His apartment was infested with rats. His body was decomposed. His friends had to reach inside his corpse to retrieve a hard drive containing his research. and his final message blamed the dark future on my 3 dickhead friends Stan, Kyle, and Cartman, saying he'd spent his whole life trying to fix their broship. There's a fan theory extension here that makes Kenny's story even darker. His family's poverty isn't just background detail, it's connected to the curse. Think about it. The McCormicks are the poorest family in South Park. They live in a rundown house. Both parents are addicts. And the reason they attended the cult of Cthulhu meeting in the first place was because it offered free beer. They were poor enough and desperate enough to go to a meeting for a Lovecraftian cult just for the free alcohol. The curse didn't arrive despite their poverty, it arrived because of it. And now they're trapped in a cycle of death and rebirth and substance abuse that repeats generation after generation. And nobody around them cares enough to notice because Kenny's family has always been invisible. Kenny's curse means he remembers every death while the world forgets. But there's another character in South Park carrying a secret about death that's arguably even worse. Because he doesn't know he's carrying it, and it involves chili. If you're enjoying this series so far, don't forget to subscribe. Eric Cartman might be the most terrifying character in the history of animated television, and I don't say that lightly. We're talking about a kid who has orchestrated hate crimes, manipulated adults into doing his bidding, started a cult, faked having Tourette syndrome, tried to exterminate an entire ethnic group, and once dressed up as a robot to trick Butters into thinking the world had ended. But out of everything Cartman has ever done, one act stands above the rest as the single darkest moment in the show's history. And the worst part is, Cartman didn't even know what he was really doing when he did it. This theory, which started as fan speculation after Scott Tenorman Must Die, aired in Season 5 and was eventually confirmed as canon in Season 14, centers on the identity of Cartman's biological father and the horrifying chain of events that followed. Let me walk you through it. In Season 5, Episode 4, Scott Tenorman Must Die, Cartman gets into a conflict with a 9th grader named Scott Tenorman. It starts over something stupid. Cartman buys Scott's pubic hair for $10, thinking he's reached puberty. And when he realizes he's been scammed, he wants his money back. Scott humiliates him repeatedly, burns his money in front of him, shows the entire town a video of Cartman pretending to be a pig. And that's when something inside Cartman snaps. What follows is one of the most elaborate revenge schemes in television history. Cartman trains a pony owned by a local farmer named Denkins to bite people. He knows Scott will try to sabotage the pony, so he warns Denkins that violent pony killers have been spotted in the area. He also knows that Scott won't go himself because he's afraid of the pony, so Scott will most likely send his parents to deal with it. And because Denkins has a policy of shooting trespassers on sight, when Mr. and Mrs. Tenorman show up on his property that night, Denkins shoots and kills them both. Cartman arrives at the scene just in time to steal the bodies. He spends the night dismembering them with a hacksaw. He then cooks the remains into chili. He invites Scott to a public chili cook-off. Scott, thinking he's pulling his own prank, has laced a pot of chili with pubic hair and plans to feed it to Cartman. But Cartman already knew about this because he anticipated that Stan and Kyle would betray him and warned Scott about the pony scheme. He switched the chili pots, so when Scott eats what he thinks is Cartman's chili, he's actually eating Chef's recipe. And Cartman is about to reveal what was in Scott's bowl. Cartman tells Scott everything, step by step. He explains how he predicted every move, how Denkins killed Scott's parents, how he stole the bodies, how he spent the night with a hacksaw, and then he asks Scott if he liked the chili he just ate. He tells him it's called Mr. and Mrs. Tenorman chili. Scott reaches into the bowl and pulls out his mother's finger, still wearing her diamond ring. He realizes he just ate his own parents. He vomits. He begins sobbing uncontrollably. And Cartman jumps on the table and sings, "Nya, nya, 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 nya. I made you eat your parents." Stan and Kyle watch from the crowd, absolutely horrified. And then, right on schedule, Radiohead shows up. Cartman had invited them earlier by writing a letter claiming Scott was a dying fan with cancer in his rear end. They see Scott crying and call him a crybaby and totally not cool, then leave. Scott is destroyed. And Cartman stands there licking the tears off his cheeks, savoring what he considers a perfect victory. Now here's where the theory turns from dark to genuinely sickening. For years, the identity of Cartman's father was a running mystery on the show. In Season 2, the show aired a special called Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, which promised to reveal who his father was. The results were delayed, then the episode turned into an April Fool's prank, and when the answer finally came, it was that Cartman's mother was actually a hermaphrodite and was his father herself. Fans accepted this mostly, but it never quite sat right. The DNA tests were handled by Dr. Mephisto, the town's resident mad scientist, and something about the whole thing felt off. Then, in Season 14, Episodes 5 and 6, titled 200 and 201, the truth finally came out. Scott Tenorman returned. He'd been in a mental institution, and he had spent his time there piecing together information about Cartman's real parentage. He confronted Cartman and forced the town's residents to admit the truth. Cartman's real father was Jack Tenorman, a player for the Denver Broncos. Jack Tenorman had an affair with Cartman's mother, Leanne, and Jack Tenorman was also Scott Tenorman's father, which means Scott Tenorman is Cartman's half-brother, which means Jack Tenorman, the man Farmer Denkins shot on his property, the man whose body Cartman dismembered with a hacksaw and cooked into chili, was Cartman's own biological father. Cartman unknowingly murdered his own father. He chopped him up. He cooked him. And he fed him to his own half-brother while singing a song about it. And the entire town of South Park knew the truth and kept it hidden for years. When Scott demanded to know why, the townspeople explained that the Broncos were having a good year and they couldn't afford any distractions. A professional football season was more important to them than telling a child who his real father was. The DNA tests from the original Cartman's Mom episodes were deliberately falsified. Dr. Mephisto, who ran the tests, was the one with access to alter them. Multiple adults in the town, including presumably the boy's parents, Officer Barbrady, and the school staff, were aware of the cover-up and said nothing. They watched this entire tragedy unfold, and they let it happen. When the truth finally comes out and Cartman learns he had his own father killed, his reaction tells you everything you need to know about this character. He doesn't grieve. He doesn't show remorse. He doesn't even seem particularly bothered by the fact that he ate his own dad in a bowl of chili. What upsets him is that being Jack Tenorman's son makes him half ginger. That's what he cries about, not the patricide, the hair color. His friend Mitch Connor cheers him up by reminding him that being a Tenorman also makes him half Denver Bronco. And Cartman immediately stops crying. The fan theory extension here is that the town-wide cover-up is the real conspiracy, and it goes deeper than protecting a football season. Think about the adults who knew. They watched an 8-year-old child, unknowingly fatherless, orchestrate the murder of 2 people, butcher their remains, cook them into food, and feed the result to another child. And they did nothing, not because they didn't know, because they did know. And stepping forward would have implicated every single one of them in the cover-up. They weren't protecting the Broncos, they were protecting themselves. Scott Tenorman escaped on a jetpack at the end of episode 201, promising he'd be back. He never got his justice. He was forced to eat his own parents by his half-brother, and the entire community let it happen, because they had already decided the truth was too inconvenient. Meanwhile, Cartman walked away, learned nothing, felt nothing, and continued being exactly who he's always been. No consequences, no growth, just a boy who ate his father and didn't care. Cartman killed his own father, and the whole town helped hide it. But what if the town itself is hiding something even bigger? Something about the nature of time and why these children have been in the 4th grade for almost 3 decades. Have you ever stopped to think about how long these kids have actually been in the 4th grade? Because when you start doing the math, it gets genuinely unsettling. South Park premiered in August of 1997. At that time, the boys were 8 years old. They're now approximately 10, 2 years of aging across 28 seasons of television. During those 2 years, they've lived through the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, the Obama years, the Trump presidency, a global pandemic, and the rise and collapse of cryptocurrency. They've had smartphones, used Zoom for school, dealt with social media addiction, and watched their town go through at least 3 apocalyptic events, all while attending the same elementary school in the same classroom taught by the same rotating cast of increasingly unstable adults. Now, you could argue that this is just how animated shows work. The Simpsons have been doing the same thing for even longer. Bart has been in the 4th grade since 1989. But South Park does something that The Simpsons never did. South Park actively engages with real-world current events in real time. The show comments on things that are happening right now, this week, this month. It acknowledges the passage of time. It shows new technology, new presidents, new cultural movements. The world of South Park ages. The people in it don't. A fan theory originally posted on Reddit in 2013 proposed an explanation for this that goes far beyond the usual cartoon floating timeline excuse. The theory suggests that the residents of South Park are trapped in a temporal loop, and that this loop is directly connected to Kenny McCormick's death and rebirth cycle. Every time Kenny dies and is reborn, the theory proposes the timeline partially resets. The town's residents experience time moving forward in terms of technology, culture, and world events, but their biological clocks remain frozen. They can't age, they can't graduate, they can't leave, they're stuck. This theory was covered by CBR and several fan analysis channels, and it picked up a secondary layer from another Reddit user who proposed something even more disturbing: that Kyle Broflovsky is the only character in South Park who is aware of the loop. According to this version of the theory, Kyle knows that he and his friends have been in the 4th grade for decades, and he carries this knowledge alone, unable to convince anyone else that something is deeply wrong with their reality. The evidence for this actually shows up in the show itself. In Season 4, Episode 1, The Tooth Fairy's Tats 2000, Kyle goes through an existential crisis. He confides in Stan that he's been questioning whether anything around him is real. He says that he sometimes feels like he can see time slowing down. Now, the episode plays this as Kyle getting too deep into philosophical questions after reading some books, and the plot resolves in a comedic way. But under the time loop theory, that scene takes on an entirely different meaning. Kyle isn't having a random existential crisis. He's accidentally perceiving the temporal anomaly that keeps the town frozen. He can feel the loop operating even if he can't articulate exactly what it is. Then there's Season 15, Episode 7, You're Getting Old. This is the episode that shook South Park fans to their core. Stan turns 10 years old, and suddenly everything around him starts to look and sound like excrement. Literally, music sounds like farts, movies look like garbage. His friendships feel hollow. His parents' marriage falls apart. Sharon tells Randy she wants a divorce. Stan and Kyle stop being friends. The episode ends with a Fleetwood Mac song playing over a montage of Stan's life collapsing, and it was one of the most devastating things the show had ever produced. Fans genuinely wondered if the show was ending, but then the next episode aired, and everything was reset. Stan's parents got back together. Stan and Kyle were friends again. Nobody mentioned the existential crisis. The show just moved on as if nothing had happened. Most critics interpreted this as the show making a meta-commentary about status quo resets in serialized television. And that's a valid reading, but the time loop theory offers a much darker interpretation. What if the reset happened because the loop corrected itself? Stan had aged. Stan had grown. Stan had started to see through the illusion of his reality, and the loop couldn't allow that. So it pulled everything back to baseline, erased the progress, and forced the characters to start over. The COVID specials added even more weight to this theory. The post-COVID movies showed the boys as adults 40 years in the future. They were in their 40s. Stan was an alcoholic whiskey consultant. Kyle was a disillusioned lawyer. Cartman had converted to Judaism. Kenny was dead. Butters was institutionalized. Shelley Marsh had died. The future was bleak and broken. And then the show used time travel to reset the timeline and return everyone to childhood. The boys went back to being fourth graders. The dark future was erased, and the show continued as normal. Under the time loop theory, this isn't just a storytelling device. It's the loop doing what it has always done, pulling the characters back, resetting the clock, preventing anyone from ever truly growing up or escaping. The COVID specials weren't a special event. They were the most dramatic example of something that has been happening quietly for 28 seasons. There's one more piece of evidence that supports this reading. In the early seasons of the show, the boys acted like 8-year-olds. They were immature, confused by adult topics, and prone to childish reactions. But as the seasons have progressed, the kids have gotten noticeably more mature. Kyle regularly delivers sophisticated moral arguments. Stan grapples with existential depression. Butters shows emotional intelligence that most adults on the show lack. Even Cartman demonstrates a kind of strategic sophistication that goes way beyond what you'd expect from a 10-year-old. The theory suggests this is because they are psychologically aging, even though their bodies can't. They've been alive for decades. They've accumulated decades of experience. But the loop keeps their bodies frozen at 10, creating a growing gap between who they are mentally and what they look like physically. And that gap, the theory argues, is slowly driving them all insane. If South Park is stuck in a loop, that raises a disturbing question about what else might not be real in this universe. Because the show already proved, in a federal court no less, that imaginary things can be legally real. And once you understand what happened in Imagination Land, the entire foundation of South Park's reality starts to crumble. The Imagination Land trilogy is 3 episodes from season 11 that aired in 2007, and they are some of the most ambitious and philosophically dense episodes the show has ever produced. What starts as a bet between Cartman and Kyle about whether leprechauns exist spirals into an interdimensional crisis involving the United States government, a nuclear weapon, and the fundamental question of what it means for something to be real. The basic setup is this. Cartman bets Kyle that leprechauns are real. If Cartman wins, Kyle has to suck his balls. Literally, they actually see a leprechaun in the woods, which means Cartman wins the bet. But the leprechaun was supposed to warn Imagination Land of an incoming terrorist attack, and because he was in South Park chasing this bet, he missed the warning. Al-Qaeda attacks Imagination Land, breaching the wall that separates the good imaginary characters from the evil ones. Butters, Stan, and Jimmy get pulled into Imagination Land during the chaos. Butters gets left behind when the others escape, and the United States military gets involved because, as it turns out, the government has known about Imagination Land for years. This is where it gets genuinely wild. The show reveals that the US government built a portal to Imagination Land. It's called Project X. They constructed a Stargate-style gateway to the dimension of human imagination, and they intended to use it as a weapon. This isn't a throwaway joke. The show commits to this premise fully. There are generals, there are Pentagon briefings, there are classified operations. The federal government of the United States, within South Park's universe, has been studying and accessing the imagination for military purposes. While all of this is happening, Cartman is pursuing his bet through the legal system. The case, Cartman versus Broflovsky, goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The initial ruling is that imaginary creatures are real, which means Kyle legally owes Cartman on the bet. The Supreme Court later overturns this, declaring imaginary creatures are not real. But Kyle then stands before the Pentagon and delivers an argument that actually stops a nuclear strike. He argues that imaginary beings like Jesus, Santa Claus, Superman, and Harry Potter have had a bigger impact on the world than most real people. They've changed how people think, how people act, how people live. They've been around for centuries and will outlast every person in the room. In a way, Kyle argues, Those things are more real than any of us here. And the government agrees. They cancel the nuclear strike. Now here's where the fan theory layer comes in. On TV Tropes, a fan proposed that the other dimension that the oil company DP accidentally drilled into during the Coon trilogy was actually Imagination Land. Remember, in those episodes, DP drills through a portal on the ocean floor that releases alien creatures into the Gulf, and then they drill on the moon and accidentally release Cthulhu. Cthulhu is a fictional creation of H.P. Lovecraft. He's a literary character. He exists in human imagination. So why is he suddenly a real entity in another dimension, unless that dimension is Imagination Land? If Cthulhu came from Imagination Land and Kenny's immortality curse comes from Cthulhu, then Kenny's entire condition is powered by the collective human imagination. His curse is literally fictional, and according to the legal precedent established in Cartman versus Broflovsky, fictional things are real, which means the curse is real because we imagine it is. The show isn't just breaking the fourth wall, it's arguing that there is no fourth wall. That the barrier between what humans imagine and what actually exists has been demolished, and the government knew about it the whole time. Butters plays a crucial role in this trilogy that often gets overlooked. He is identified by the residents of Imagination Land as the Chosen One, a real human boy with the power to reshape their entire reality through pure imagination. After the Pentagon launches a nuclear weapon into Imagination Land, destroying everything and everyone in it, Butters alone survives, and he uses his imagination to rebuild the entire realm from scratch. He reimagines everything. He brings back Santa Claus, who was killed in the terrorist attack. He restores the good characters. He rebuilds the castle walls. A child's imagination, the show argues, is powerful enough to recreate an entire dimension after nuclear annihilation. And then his parents ground him for not coming home from Imagination Land in time to clean out the basement. That's the kind of show this is. The Imagination Land trilogy establishes something that reshapes everything else in the South Park universe. Reality is not fixed. The barrier between what's imagined and what exists is porous, exploitable, and already compromised by government intervention. And if you accept that premise, then every supernatural event in South Park's history, every monster, every alien, every god and demon, and talking piece of Christmas poo might not be cartoon absurdity at all. It might be the natural consequence of a universe where imagination has been weaponized and reality has been permanently destabilized. Imagination can be weaponized. The government knows it. And there's one scientist in South Park who has been quietly experimenting with the boundaries of biology and reality for decades, operating out of a hilltop facility that nobody seems to regulate. Don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying the series. Dr. Alphonse Mephisto might be one of the most overlooked characters in South Park's mythology, and that's exactly what makes him so suspicious. He operates a genetics research facility on a hill overlooking the town. He creates monstrous genetic hybrids, including a four-assed mongoose, a four-assed monkey, and various other multi-assed animals whose existence serves no discernible scientific purpose. He has successfully cloned a human being overnight. His son, Terrence, once cloned a human foot for a school science project, and nobody at the school questioned it. And Mephisto is the person who ran the DNA tests that determined, or rather failed to determine, the identity of Eric Cartman's biological father. Mephisto was introduced in Season 1, Episode 5, An Elephant Makes Love to a Pig. The boys visit his genetic engineering ranch because they want to create an elephant and pig hybrid. Mephisto is delighted to help. His facility is enormous, filled with experiments that range from the absurd to the genuinely disturbing. He clones Stan Marsh overnight, producing a fully functional human clone that causes chaos throughout the episode. And nobody in town, not the police, not the government, not any regulatory agency, ever shows up to ask questions about why a private citizen is running an unregulated genetics lab on a hilltop in rural Colorado. This becomes critically important in the Cartman parentage storyline. In Season 2, when the town is trying to determine who Cartman's father is, Mephisto is the one who runs the DNA tests. He's positioned as the town's authority on biological identity, the only person with the equipment and expertise to answer the question. But the results are delayed, they're tampered with, and when they finally come out, they're wrong. The show told us for years that Cartman's mother was a hermaphrodite who was actually his father. It wasn't until season 14's 200 and 201 that we learned the truth. The tests were deliberately falsified. Someone changed the results, and Mephisto was the person with the access, the motive, and the means to do it. Why would he falsify the results? The town-wide cover-up about Jack Tennerman being Cartman's father required everyone to play along, and Mephisto was the linchpin. He was the only person who could scientifically confirm or deny the truth. By altering the tests, he ensured the cover-up held. He protected the Broncos season, he protected the town's adults from scrutiny, and he set in motion a chain of events that would eventually lead to Cartman murdering his own father and feeding him to his half-brother in a bowl of chili. There's also the matter of Kevin, Mephisto's silent assistant. Kevin never speaks. He has no apparent backstory, no autonomous personality, and no function beyond standing near Mephisto and occasionally handing him things. Some fans have speculated that Kevin might be a clone himself, or some kind of genetic experiment. He fits the profile of a created being rather than a hired employee. He's always there, always silent, always obedient. In a facility that produces human clones overnight, the idea that the lab assistant might be one of those clones isn't exactly a stretch. Mephisto's facility raises questions that the show has never answered. Who funds it? Who regulates it? How does a private citizen in a small mountain town acquire the technology to clone humans and splice animal genetics without any government oversight? The answer might be that there is oversight, but it's not the kind anyone would want. Remember, the US government in South Park's universe already operates interdimensional portals and classifies supernatural phenomena. A genetics lab that produces multi-assed animals might be exactly the kind of operation they'd want running quietly off the books in a town where nobody asks too many questions. Mephisto falsified one boy's identity and nobody ever held him accountable. But there's another boy in South Park whose entire identity has been systematically destroyed, not by a scientist, but by the people who were supposed to protect him. And his story might be the most tragic thing the show has ever told. Leopold Butters Stotch is the most systematically abused character in the history of South Park, and possibly in the history of animated television. And I want to be careful with how I frame this because the show plays his suffering for comedy, and the comedy works. That's part of what makes it so disturbing. You laugh at Butters getting grounded for things that aren't his fault. You laugh at his parents overreacting to everything. You laugh at his clumsy attempts to be a supervillain. And then one day you stop and look at the full picture of what has been done to this character across 28 seasons, and the laughter dies in your throat. Because what happened to Butters isn't funny. It's a textbook case of childhood abuse, radicalization, identity destruction, and institutional abandonment. And the show documented every single step. Let me start at the beginning. In Season 6, Episode 6, Professor Chaos, Stan, Kyle, and Cartman call Butters into Cartman's basement and formally inform him that he is being fired as their friend. Not phased out, not gently distanced, fired. They tell him he is no longer fit to fill Kenny's role in the group, and they're going to hold auditions for a replacement. Butters goes home and sits at his bedroom window, and in a quiet monologue, he recalls everything he's done for these boys. He bought tampons for them when they asked. He appeared on the Maury Povich show with testicles glued to his chin because they told him to. He went along with every scheme, every manipulation, every humiliation because he thought they were his friends. And now they've discarded him like he's nothing. That night, Butters snaps. He constructs a crude costume from aluminum foil and a cape, calls himself Professor Chaos, and vows to wreak havoc on the world. His first act of villainy is going to a Bennigan's restaurant and swapping 2 soup orders on the counter. That's it, 2 bowls of soup. This kid has been broken so completely by the people around him that his idea of maximum evil is giving someone the wrong soup. And the show frames this with dramatic music and sinister camera angles, which makes it even sadder, because Butters genuinely believes he's being terrifying. But Professor Chaos wasn't born out of nothing. It was the culmination of years of abuse that the show had been quietly documenting. Butters' parents, Stephen and Linda Stotch, are among the worst parents in South Park, and that's a competitive field. They ground Butters for everything. They ground him when things aren't his fault. They ground him for being kidnapped. They ground him for being taken to another dimension. The grounding is constant, disproportionate, and inescapable. It's the only parenting tool they have, and they wield it with the precision of people who fundamentally do not understand or care about their child's emotional needs. In Season 16, Episode 5, Butterballs, the abuse gets even more explicit. Butters' grandmother comes to visit, and she is physically and psychologically violent toward him. She slaps him across the face. She calls him slurs. During a family dinner, she stabs him in the thigh with a fork under the table while smiling at his parents, and when Butters winces in pain, his father asks what's wrong. Butters says he's just gassy. He doesn't tell anyone because his grandmother has threatened to kill him if he narcs on her. The school launches an anti-bullying campaign in the same episode, complete with a music video and a celebrity spokesperson, and the irony is suffocating. Nobody notices that Butters, the actual bullying victim sitting right there in the room, is being abused by his own family. This is the environment that produced Professor Chaos, a child so starved for agency and so accustomed to powerlessness that his only escape is a foil cape, and fantasies of villainy so mild they wouldn't inconvenience a goldfish. And the show never lets him win, even in his fantasy. Every time Butters tries to assert himself as Professor Chaos, the Simpsons have already done it. That's literally a running gag. Every scheme Butters invents has already been done on another show. Even his rebellion is derivative. Even his darkness belongs to someone else. But the real tragedy doesn't become clear until the post-COVID specials. In the future timeline set 40 years after the pandemic, Stan and Kyle are trying to find someone called Victor Chaos. They track him to a mental asylum, and the warden warns them that Chaos is dangerous. He explains that lives have been destroyed by his behavior since he was left grounded in his room for 16 years when his parents never returned home from a movie. 16 years. Butters' parents grounded him, went to a movie, and never came back. And Butters stayed in his room for 16 years because that's what he was told to do. Because obedience was the only thing that had ever kept him safe, and even that had failed him 1,000 times before. By the time the world found him, he wasn't Butters anymore. He was Victor Chaos, a manipulative con artist who identified entirely by his villain name and had become genuinely dangerous to everyone around him. He convinced people to invest in NFTs. He ruined lives. He escaped the asylum by manipulating a guard into making an investment. The warden doesn't call him Butters. Nobody does. The child is gone. Only the villain persona remains. The arc from Butters to Professor Chaos to Victor Chaos is a complete radicalization pipeline. An innocent, trusting child is abused by his peers, neglected by his parents, ignored by his community, and physically assaulted by his own grandmother. Each time he tries to tell someone, nobody listens. Each time he tries to fight back, he fails. Each time he tries to be good, he gets punished anyway. So eventually, he stops being good. He stops being Butters. He becomes someone else entirely. And that someone else is capable of destroying lives without remorse, because the person he used to be was destroyed first. The aluminum foil cape isn't a joke. It's a child's attempt at armor, and nobody in South Park ever saw it for what it was. Butters was broken by the people who were supposed to protect him. But what if the entire town of South Park is designed to break people? What if nobody is supposed to leave? What if the suffering isn't accidental, but structural? If you're enjoying this series so far, don't forget to subscribe. There's a fan theory that has been circulating on Reddit for years, originally proposed by a user who went by Yay855, that suggests the town of South Park is actually a form of purgatory. Not the fire and brimstone kind, more like a waiting room, a holding dimension for souls who aren't good enough to get into heaven, but who are too stupid to be considered truly evil. They're not being punished exactly, they're being processed. And the processing takes forever because nobody ever learns anything. This theory was covered by Looper in 2023, and it gained traction in fan communities because it actually explains a lot of things that otherwise make no sense about the show's universe. Think about what happens in South Park on a regular basis. The town is invaded by aliens, Satan shows up and starts dating people. Jesus Christ literally lives there and hosts a public access television show. Cthulhu emerges from the ocean. The government builds portals to imaginary dimensions. Kids die and come back to life. And through all of it, the adults of South Park just keep going about their business, making the same mistakes, learning nothing, and resetting to zero every single week. In most television shows, this would just be called episodic storytelling. Events happen, they resolve, and next week everyone starts fresh. But South Park exists in a universe where continuity matters. Characters reference past events. They acknowledge things that happened seasons ago. The show expects you to remember that Cartman killed Scott Tenorman's parents, that Kenny is immortal, that Butters was Professor Chaos. And yet, despite this continuity, nobody in the town ever grows or changes in a lasting way. Randy Marsh keeps making the same terrible decisions. The boys keep ending up in the same kind of trouble. The town keeps getting destroyed and rebuilt. It's a loop, and loops are what purgatory is made of. The theory proposes that Jesus and Satan's presence in the town is direct evidence of an afterlife operating in the background. Jesus wouldn't just live in a random Colorado town unless that town served some spiritual function. Satan wouldn't keep showing up for casual visits unless there was infrastructure connecting South Park to the underworld. The theory suggests that this infrastructure is the purgatory mechanism itself. South Park sits at a junction between heaven and hell, and the people who live there are souls being processed through an endless cycle of moral tests that they keep failing. Kenny's death and rebirth cycle fits perfectly into this framework. He's a soul being recycled through purgatory. He dies, he's reborn, he faces the same circumstances, and the loop continues. The fact that nobody remembers his deaths is part of the mechanism. Purgatory isn't supposed to be obvious. The souls aren't supposed to know they're being tested. Awareness would compromise the test. The Reddit thread went further, proposing that the children of South Park, specifically Stan, Kyle, Kenny, and Cartman, are actually child angels sent to observe the adults' suffering and help them learn from their mistakes. They're not stuck in purgatory themselves, they're part of the system. This would explain why the kids are consistently more moral, more aware, and more emotionally intelligent than the adults around them. They're not precocious children. They're spiritual beings wearing the costumes of children. And every end of episode speech where one of them says, "I learned something today," is a genuine purgatorial lesson being delivered to the town, which the town immediately forgets, resetting the cycle. Chef was theorized to be an angel too, one who was sentenced to purgatory for indulging in too many pleasures of the flesh, but who ultimately wanted to help the children and guide them toward better choices. His departure from the show under this reading represents an angel being pulled out of the system, leaving the children without their guide. And things got noticeably darker after he left. Whether you buy the full purgatory theory or not, it provides a framework that explains the otherwise inexplicable aspects of South Park's universe. Why does a small mountain town attract cosmic-level threats? Why do the same people keep making the same mistakes? Why does nobody ever permanently change? Because they're not supposed to. The suffering is the point. The repetition is the punishment. And the only escape is a kind of moral growth that the residents of South Park seem fundamentally incapable of achieving. If South Park is purgatory, then Randy Marsh might be its most damned resident. because the show quietly revealed that Randy is personally responsible for a global pandemic, and he has never faced real consequences for it. Not in this life anyway. The Pandemic Special, which aired as Season 24, Episode 1 in September of 2020, dropped a bombshell that the show played mostly for dark comedy, but that has genuinely horrifying implications when you step back and think about it. Within the South Park universe, Randy Marsh caused COVID-19. He is patient zero. He is the reason millions of people died. And the way it happened is exactly as stupid and reckless as you'd expect from Randy. The episode opens in a South Park that has been devastated by the pandemic. The town is deserted, businesses are closed, people are sick and dying. Butters, wearing a mask, begs his dad to take him to Build-A-Bear, which has just reopened. His dad tells him they're not visiting non-essential businesses. Meanwhile, Randy Marsh is thriving. Integrity Farms weed has seen a 400% increase in sales since the shutdown in March. Randy shows up at the town square to gloat about his success and announce that he's giving back to the community by launching a Integrity Pandemic Special. His wife Sharon is disgusted. She tells him he's profiting from a crisis that is killing people. Randy's response is simple. We'll see if they like my special. Then the truth comes out. Scientists announce that they've traced the coronavirus to a bat in Wuhan, China, and they can't figure out how the virus jumped from a bat to a human. Randy's face drops because he knows exactly how it happened. In a flashback, we see Randy in China on a business trip, and he and Mickey Mouse took turns having sex with a bat. That's it. That's the origin of the pandemic in South Park's universe. Randy Marsh had sex with a bat, and then, because Mickey Mouse encouraged him, he had sex with a pangolin, and the virus mutated through his DNA into something that could infect humans. Randy's first instinct isn't to confess, it's to cover it up. He calls Mickey Mouse in a panic and says they can't let the scientists find that bat. He's not worried about the millions of people dying. He's worried that if Sharon finds out he's responsible for COVID, she would be, and I'm quoting the show here, a total bitch about it. That's his concern, his wife being upset with him. Things escalate from there. Scientists determine that another species inserted its DNA into the pangolin, and the key to creating a vaccine is extracting and identifying the foreign DNA. Randy realizes the foreign DNA is his. So he kidnaps the pangolin from a scientific facility to prevent anyone from discovering the truth. Mickey Mouse sends him a death threat in the form of a human heart in a box with the words, "You're dead" written in blood on the lid. And Randy's solution to all of this is to ejaculate into his Integrity Farms Pandemic Special marijuana, because his DNA contains the antibodies needed for a vaccine, and he figures he can secretly vaccinate people through his weed without anyone knowing. This actually works, sort of. Randy sneaks into the hospital at night and forces his special into his brother-in-law Jimbo's mouth while Jimbo is unconscious. Jimbo gets better. Word spreads. People start lining up at Integrity Farms. Randy is so exhausted from providing the, let's call it, biological component that he can barely stand. He uses a walking cane while selling weed from his roadside stand. And everyone who takes the special starts growing mustaches that look exactly like Randy's. It becomes a town-wide epidemic of its own. Dr. Fauci goes on the news telling people to wear their masks over their mouths and noses where the mustache would be. The pandemic special ends with Randy having a moment of apparent guilt. He walks down Main Street and sees the devastation the virus has caused. A man approaches and thanks him for the pandemic special, saying it's the only thing that helped him cope after his wife died from the virus. Randy screams at him to stop and runs away. He decides to own up to everything. He goes to the bedroom to confess to Sharon, and he finds Sharon sporting a mustache herself, even though she claims she doesn't smoke marijuana. Randy realizes she's been secretly enjoying his weed. And in that moment, any impulse toward honesty evaporates. He decides not to own up. He looks at the camera and says, "I think I'll make a few more specials." The vaccination special, the second pandemic episode, shows Randy continuing to cover his tracks. He ejaculates onto all of his remaining weed to maximize the vaccine distribution. He dodges death threats from Mickey Mouse, he manipulates the healthcare system, and at no point does anyone in a position of authority connect the dots and hold him accountable. The post-COVID movies, set 40 years later, make Randy's legacy even more damning. Adult Kenny, the scientist who spent his life investigating the pandemic's origins, left behind research that traced the virus back to Tegrity weed. Stan knew this. He knew something about Kenny's death was connected to his father. And he spent the entire first post-COVID movie refusing to visit Randy, refusing to confront the truth, because facing what his father did was more than he could bear. When they finally found Randy in the future, he was hiding from authorities at a Denny's Applebee's Max, clutching the last sprout of Tegrity weed, and still insisting that you can't change the past, only how people think about it. That's his philosophy, not accountability, not confession, perception management. Randy Marsh created a global pandemic by having sex with a bat and a pangolin. He profited from it. He covered it up. He used his own bodily fluids to create an unauthorized vaccine distributed through marijuana. And when the dust settled, he went home, saw that his wife secretly liked his weed, and decided that was good enough. No consequences, no growth, no justice, just Randy being Randy, which, when you think about it, might be the most realistic thing South Park has ever depicted. Randy created a pandemic and profited from it, but the show's darkest hour might not involve Randy or Cartman at all. It involves what happened to the kids when they finally grew up, and what that future reveals about who these characters really are. The post-COVID specials might be the most emotionally devastating thing South Park has ever produced. And I don't say that as hyperbole. These two movies, released on Paramount Plus in late 2021 and early 2022, did something the show had never attempted in its entire run. They showed us the future, not a joke future, not a cutaway gag. The actual future, what these characters become when the safety net of childhood finally drops away and they have to face adulthood with all the damage they've accumulated over 28 seasons of trauma, neglect, and dysfunction. And what they become is heartbreaking. The first post-COVID movie opens 40 years after the pandemic began. Stan Marsh is in his mid-40s. He lives alone in an apartment in Denver. He works as a whiskey consultant, which sounds sophisticated until you realize it means he drinks professionally because drinking is the only thing he's good at. He talks to his Amazon Alexa for companionship. He has no partner, no close friends, and no relationship with his father. When we first see him, he's watching the news about the death of someone from his past, and the expression on his face isn't grief, it's exhaustion. Like this is just one more thing that was always going to go wrong. Kyle Broflovsky is a lawyer in a small town. He's not successful, he's not fulfilled, he's just there. Going through the motions of a life that never quite became what he imagined. When he and Stan reconnect at Kenny's wake, the chemistry between them is strained and awkward. These were best friends, super best friends, as the show used to call them. And now they can barely make conversation without it turning into an argument. Kenny McCormick is dead. Of course he is. The irony is almost too perfect. The boy who died hundreds of times and always came back has finally, in adulthood, stayed dead. The cause of death is listed as the COVID Delta Plus rewards program variant, but his friends suspect it's a cover-up. Kenny had been working as a scientist, spending years researching time travel and the origins of the pandemic. He was on the verge of a breakthrough. And then he died under suspicious circumstances, and his research was hidden inside his corpse. His apartment was infested with rats. His body was decomposed and naked. Stan, Kyle, and Cartman had to argue about whose hand would go inside Kenny's body to retrieve the hard drive. And Stan eventually did it because Stan always has to fix everything. That's his role. That's always been his role. But the biggest shock of the first movie is Eric Cartman, When the boys meet Cartman at Kenny's wake, they discover that he has converted to Judaism, become a rabbi in Colorado Springs, married a Jewish woman named Yentl, and has 2 children he genuinely seems to love. He's warm, he's patient, he hugs his kids in public. He references the pandemic as having changed him. He says he and Kenny stayed in contact over the years and that Kenny's mission was to find the origin of the coronavirus. Kyle, predictably, is furious. He insists the entire thing is an act, a decades-long con designed specifically to upset him, because that's exactly the kind of thing Cartman would do. Dedicate 40 years of his life to an elaborate Jewish identity just to get under Kyle's skin one final time. And here's what makes it so brilliant. The show never tells you who's right. Kyle might be correct. This might be the greatest Cartman scheme of all time. A 40-year slow burn prank that requires marrying a woman, having children, converting to an entire religion, and building a community life. All for the payoff of watching Kyle lose his mind. Or Kyle might be wrong. The pandemic might have genuinely changed Cartman. People do change. Even terrible people. Even Cartman. The ambiguity is the point. The show refuses to resolve it because resolving it would be too easy. Life doesn't tell you whether people are sincere. You just have to decide what you believe. Cartman's children are a critical detail. They've been raised to say "fuck Uncle Kyle" with genuine conviction. It's their family catchphrase. They say it together in unison with the casual comfort of kids repeating something they've heard 1,000 times. If Cartman is faking his entire identity, then he's trained his children to participate in the deception from birth. If he's genuine, then his deep-seated issues with Kyle have simply been passed to the next generation in a different form. Either way, Kyle remains the center of Cartman's emotional universe. Even 40 years later, even after conversion and marriage and fatherhood. Kenny's posthumous video message is the emotional core of both movies. After retrieving the hard drive from Kenny's body, the boys gather to watch his final recording. And what Kenny says reframes the entire series. He blames the dark future on my 3 dickhead friends, Stan, Kyle, and Cartman. He says that after their friendship ended, they became combative and pessimistic, and the world got worse as a result. He reveals that he has spent his whole life trying to fix their broship. His life's work wasn't just about the pandemic or time travel, it was about them, about the 4 of them, about the friendship that was supposed to hold everything together. The video shows Kenny's attempt at time travel. The machine kills all of his lab assistants. He returns to the lab, looks at the camera, and quietly walks away. The boys are stunned. The bad guys they've been trying to identify, the shadowy force responsible for the dark future, is themselves. Their broken friendship is the catastrophe, not a villain, not a conspiracy, just 4 boys who stopped being friends and let the world fall apart because of it. The second movie, The Return of COVID, uses time travel to try to fix the timeline. The boys learn that if they can prevent the pandemic from starting, the future might be better. This leads them back to their childhood, back to South Park Elementary, back to the moment when everything began to go wrong. And the show gives them a choice: fix the future and lose everything they become, or preserve the broken timeline and live with the consequences. Cartman, naturally, doesn't want to change the future, because in this timeline he has a wife and children he loves. Changing the past would erase them. He desperately tries to stop the time travel, starting a foundation against time travel at the South Park Church and recruiting anyone willing to help. Kevin Stoley shows up thinking it's a Doctor Who convention. Scott Malkinson, who has become a priest, tries to help but is largely ignored. Cartman's fear is real, even if his motives are selfish. He doesn't want to lose his family. Whether that family is genuine or part of an elaborate con, his attachment to it is undeniable. The timeline is ultimately reset. The boys return to childhood. The dark future is erased. Cartman's family may never exist. And the show continues as if nothing happened, with the boys back in the 4th grade, back at the bus stop, back to the beginning. The loop closes. The darkest reading of this ending is that the good outcome, returning to childhood, is actually the tragedy. Adult Cartman found redemption. He found love, he found family, he found purpose, and all of it was erased so that 4 boys could be friends again in the 4th grade. The show argues, quietly but unmistakably, that childhood is the only version of these characters that works. Adulthood breaks them. The future destroys them. The only way they can be who they're supposed to be is if they never grow up. And thanks to the time loop, they never will. If you're enjoying this series so far, don't forget to subscribe. The next theory explores a hidden connection between 2 characters that you might have never noticed. There's a theory that has been discussed on Looper in various fan forums since the mid-2000s that proposes something genuinely strange about the relationship between Eric Cartman and Kenny McCormick. The theory suggests that the 2 of them share some kind of psychic or supernatural connection, and that this connection explains patterns in the show that most viewers chalk up to coincidence. The most basic observation is statistical. Cartman is present for a disproportionate number of Kenny's deaths, more than Stan, more than Kyle. Cartman is consistently the character standing closest to Kenny when he dies, and he's often the one who reacts most dramatically, or in some cases causes the death directly. You could argue this is just because Cartman is the most chaotic character in the group, and therefore the most likely to be involved in dangerous situations. But the frequency is notable enough that fans started tracking it. The connection goes deeper than proximity. In the Coon trilogy, Cartman, operating as the Coon, personally allies himself with Cthulhu. He befriends the entity by rubbing its belly in a scene that parodies My Neighbor Totoro. And he directs Cthulhu to destroy things he doesn't like, including a synagogue, hippies, and the city of San Francisco. Cartman bonds with the same Lovecraftian entity that is the source of Kenny's immortality curse. This creates a triangulated, supernatural relationship. Kenny's parents joined the cult of Cthulhu and cursed their son. Cthulhu was released into the world through an oil drilling accident, and Cartman, of all people, becomes Cthulhu's closest human companion. Fans have noted that Cartman occasionally displays a kind of awareness about Kenny's condition that the other boys don't share. He seems less surprised when Kenny returns after dying. He makes fewer comments about the strangeness of Kenny's resilience. It's as if, on some level, Cartman already knows that Kenny can't stay dead. He doesn't question it, he just accepts it. And acceptance of the impossible is not something Cartman is known for. He questions everything else, he fights everything else. But Kenny coming back from the dead doesn't register as unusual to him. In the post-COVID movies, Kenny's final message specifically names Stan, Kyle, and Cartman as the 3 friends whose broken relationship ruined the future. Not Stan, Kyle, and Butters, not Stan, Kyle, and Craig, Cartman. Despite everything Cartman has done, despite being the worst person in South Park by almost any measure, Kenny still considered him essential. Kenny spent his entire adult life trying to fix the friendship between these 4 specific people, and Cartman was always part of the equation. Kenny's research, his time travel experiments, his dying message, all of it orbits the 4 of them. Cartman is cosmically tethered to this group. And through the Cthulhu connection, he may be cosmically tethered to Kenny specifically. The theory doesn't propose that Cartman consciously knows about the psychic link. It suggests that the connection operates below conscious awareness, like a frequency that both of them are tuned to without realizing it. Cartman gravitates toward Kenny. Kenny's curse pulls Cartman into its orbit. And the supernatural infrastructure connecting them, the cult, the Cthulhu bond, the immortality mechanism, ensures that they can never truly separate. Cartman isn't just Kenny's worst friend, he might be his spiritual counterpart. Speaking of Cartman's obsessions, there's another relationship in the show that fans have been debating for over a decade, and it might be the key to understanding everything about who Eric Cartman really is. And it has nothing to do with Kenny. Cartman hates Kyle Broflovsky. This is established in the first episode and reinforced in virtually every episode that follows. He mocks Kyle's Jewish identity constantly. He makes anti-Semitic jokes. He schemes against Kyle specifically and personally. He once attempted to engineer a second Holocaust. He tried to get Kyle to suck his balls through a federal court case. He trained his children to say "fuck Uncle Kyle" as a family tradition. By any standard, Cartman's treatment of Kyle is obsessive, relentless, and deeply personal. But here's the question some fans started asking as early as the late 2000s, covered by What Culture in 2015, and discussed extensively on Reddit ever since. What if the hatred is a mask? What if Cartman's obsession with Kyle isn't driven by genuine anti-Semitism, but by something he can't process, can't articulate, and definitely can't admit? What if Cartman's fixation on Kyle is actually a deep emotional attachment that his damaged psychology can only express as hostility? The evidence, once you start looking for it, is unsettling. Cartman's treatment of Kyle is qualitatively different from how he treats everyone else. He's mean to Stan, but it's casual. He ignores or manipulates Butters, but it's impersonal. Kenny is a prop to him mostly. But Kyle gets Cartman's full attention. Kyle gets his most elaborate schemes, his most personal attacks, his most emotionally charged confrontations. Nobody else in South Park receives the intensity of focus that Cartman directs at Kyle. And intensity, regardless of whether it presents as love or hatred, is a form of intimacy. Look at the Imagination Land trilogy again. The bet between Cartman and Kyle isn't about money. It's not about pride, at least not in the usual sense. The prize Cartman pursues across 3 episodes through federal court and into a parallel dimension is an intimate physical act with Kyle. He could have bet anything. He could have demanded money or humiliation or public servitude. Instead, the thing Cartman wants more than anything else in the world is Kyle performing an act on his body. He pursues this with more dedication and persistence than he has shown toward any other goal in the entire series. And when he finally gets what he wants in Imagination Land, by creating an imaginary duplicate of Kyle, it's not the act itself that satisfies him, it's that Kyle had to watch. Fast forward to the post-COVID future. Cartman has converted to Judaism, he married a Jewish woman, he's raising Jewish children, he became a rabbi. Now Kyle insists this is all an elaborate prank, and maybe it is. But consider the alternative. What if the pandemic really did change Cartman? What if, stripped of his childhood defense mechanisms, forced to confront his own loneliness and dysfunction, Cartman reached toward the thing he'd been pushing away his entire life? He knew not Kyle the person, but everything Kyle represents. The identity, the culture, the faith, the belonging. Cartman couldn't love Kyle, so he became him. He married a Jewish woman who isn't Kyle, but who represents everything Kyle is. He built a life that mirrors exactly what Kyle's life should have looked like. It's either the most elaborate insult in history or the most tragic love letter ever written. And the show will never tell you which. The theory doesn't necessarily require a romantic interpretation. It proposes that Cartman's emotional wiring is so fundamentally broken that the only way he can express deep attachment is through hostility and obsession. Kyle is the person he cares about most in the world, and that's precisely why Kyle receives his absolute worst behavior. It's not love in any healthy sense. It's not even affection. It's emotional dependency so severe that it has consumed Cartman's entire identity for decades. And the evidence for it is written into every season of the show, hiding in plain sight behind the anti-Semitic jokes and the schemes and the rage. If you're enjoying the series, don't forget to like and subscribe. The next theory looks at Kenny from a completely different angle, and it might change how you see the entire show. Every fan theory we've discussed so far treats Kenny McCormick's story as supernatural. The curse, the cult, the immortality, the Cthulhu connection. But there's a theory that strips all of that away and looks at Kenny purely as a symbol. According to this interpretation, which has been discussed on the Fan Theory World podcast and extensively on Reddit, Kenny isn't just a character who happens to be poor. His entire existence is a deliberate allegory for how poverty makes people invisible, disposable, and forgotten by society. Start with the most obvious element. Kenny dies constantly and nobody remembers. Think about what that actually represents. In the real world, people in poverty die at higher rates from preventable causes, from lack of health care, from violence, from environmental factors, from substance abuse. And the broader society barely notices. Deaths in impoverished communities receive less media coverage, less public outrage, less institutional response. People die, the world moves on, the pattern repeats. That is exactly what happens to Kenny every single episode. His dialogue is muffled by his parka hood. He's literally silenced. Even when he speaks, even when he has something important to say, the audience and the other characters can barely understand him. He has opinions, ideas, desires, and fears, and none of it gets through clearly. He is a person with a full inner life who is perpetually unable to communicate it because of the circumstances of his birth. The parka isn't just a character design choice, it's a metaphor for how poverty strips people of their voice. His family lives in the worst conditions in South Park. His parents are addicts, their house is falling apart. They joined a cult for free beer, which means they were so desperate for any form of community and sustenance that they'd attend a Lovecraftian ritual to get it. Their poverty isn't just a background detail, it's the engine of every tragedy in Kenny's life. The cult meeting that cursed him, the substance abuse that prevents his parents from protecting him, the hood that silences him, the deaths that nobody remembers. All of it traces back to poverty. Kenny is also the most expendable member of the group. When the boys needed to replace a friend in season 6, they held auditions. Kenny's spot was open and the tryouts were treated like a reality show elimination. Butters, Tweak, and others competed for the privilege of being the fourth friend. Nobody mourned Kenny's absence with the weight you'd expect from losing a best friend. He was replaceable, interchangeable. And that's exactly how society treats people in poverty. They are a statistic, not a person. When one falls, another is expected to fill the role. The post-COVID movies drive this allegory home with devastating precision. Adult Kenny became a scientist. He was brilliant. He dedicated his life to solving the pandemic and saving his friends. He did more for the future of humanity than any other character in the show. And when he died, his apartment was infested with rats. His body was decomposed. His corpse was naked and abandoned. His friends had to reach inside him to retrieve his research because he had no other way to ensure it survived. Even in death, even after a lifetime of genius and sacrifice, Kenny was treated the way poverty treats everyone who lives within it. Used, discarded, and forgotten until someone needed something from the remains. The theory extends even to Kenny's immortality. In most interpretations, his ability to come back from the dead is a supernatural gift or curse. But under the poverty allegory, it means something different entirely. Kenny can't stay dead because society needs a perpetual underclass. Someone who absorbs the worst of everything, resets, and comes back to absorb more. His death isn't tragic to the people around him because his life was never valued in the first place. His immortality isn't mercy, it's exploitation. He exists to suffer, to die, to come back, and to suffer again, because the system requires someone at the bottom, and Kenny has been at the bottom since the day he was born. This reading transformed South Park from a show about 4 boys having adventures into something much more pointed. Kenny isn't comic relief, he's an indictment. Every time you laugh at his death, you're participating in the same dismissal that the theory critiques. You're watching someone die and moving on to the next joke, just like the characters on screen. And that's not an accident, that's the point. There's one character in South Park whose story arc might be the strangest and most revealing of the show's entire run, and it's not one of the boys, it's their teacher. Mr. Garrison has undergone more identity transformations than any other character in the history of the show. And depending on how you interpret his arc, he's either a victim of the same chaotic forces that destabilize everyone in South Park, or he's the most sophisticated piece of political commentary the show has ever attempted. When the show began, Mr. Garrison was a closeted gay man with a puppet named Mr. Who said the things Garrison couldn't say out loud. He was a terrible teacher who barely understood the subjects he was supposed to be teaching, and his primary narrative function was to demonstrate how poorly the adults in South Park served the children in their care. Over the years, Garrison came out as gay, then had gender reassignment surgery and became Mrs. Garrison, then transitioned back, then became the President of the United States in a direct parody of real-world political figures. Each of these shifts corresponded to a major cultural moment in American life. Garrison's identity didn't change randomly. It changed in response to the zeitgeist. He is, in effect, the show's living barometer for American cultural politics. The presidential arc is where this theory becomes most visible. Starting in season 20, Garrison transforms into a political figure whose rhetoric and behavior mirrors real-world events with an almost uncomfortable precision. As president, he governs through chaos, makes decisions based on impulse and spite, and treats the office as a personal platform rather than a public trust. During the pandemic special, President Garrison shows up at a press conference with a flamethrower, burns a scientist and a pangolin to death in front of a crowd, and then cheerfully asks people to remember to vote in the upcoming election. Some people scream and run, others just stand there, dumbfounded. It's one of the most darkly perfect images the show has ever created. What makes Garrison's arc theoretically interesting is that it suggests a character who has no fixed identity at all. Every version of Garrison is temporary. Every persona is adopted in response to external forces and abandoned when the cultural winds shift. He's not a person in the way the other characters are people. He's a mirror. He reflects whatever is happening in the society around him. And because American society is constantly contradicting itself, Garrison constantly contradicts himself too. He's been conservative and liberal. He's been hateful and tolerant. He's been a man and a woman and a president and a teacher. The only constant is that he is always fundamentally incapable of genuine self-reflection. He changes form, but he never changes nature. The fan theory extension here is that Garrison is the show's thesis character. Not the protagonist, not the moral center, but the character who most purely embodies what South Park thinks about America. A country that reinvents itself constantly, that contradicts its own values on a regular basis, that treats identity as performance rather than substance, and that puts people in positions of enormous power who have absolutely no business being there. Garrison is America, and America is Garrison, and neither one of them knows who they are. Have you ever noticed that almost every adult in South Park is complicit in something? Not just neglectful or incompetent, but actively complicit in covering up things that should have serious consequences. The next theory pulls together evidence from across the entire series and proposes that the adults of South Park aren't just bad parents and bad neighbors. They're operating as a collective conspiracy of silence designed to protect the town's status quo at any cost. We've already covered the biggest example. The Cartman paternity cover-up involved the entire town, knowing that Jack Tennerman was Cartman's biological father and choosing to say nothing. Dr. Mephisto falsified the DNA tests. The other parents knew and stayed silent. Officer Barbrady, the town's only law enforcement for much of the series, never investigated. When the truth came out, the town's excuse was that the Broncos were having a good year and they couldn't afford any distractions. A child's right to know his father was weighed against a football season, and the football season won. Every adult in town was okay with that calculation. But the Cartman cover-up is just the most dramatic example of a pattern that runs through the entire series. The cult of Cthulhu had members throughout the community. Mr. Adler, the shop teacher, was at the meetings. The goth kids were there. The Star Trek fans from school were there. This wasn't a fringe group hiding in the shadows. It was a community organization with a membership roster that overlapped significantly with the town's everyday social fabric. People who saw each other at the grocery store and the school and the church were also gathering to chant Lovecraftian incantations and participate in rituals that cursed at least one child with eternal suffering. And nobody broke ranks. Nobody told the authorities, because in South Park there are no real authorities. The people who should be investigating are the same people attending the cult meetings. Officer Barbrady is worth examining on his own. For years, he was the only police officer in South Park, and his incompetence was treated as a running joke. He couldn't solve crimes, he couldn't maintain order. He once declared there was nothing to see here at the scene of an alien landing. But what if his incompetence isn't accidental? What if it's functional? A town with as many secrets as South Park needs a police force that doesn't ask questions. A cop who can't solve a murder investigation is extremely useful to a community that has covered up at least one murder and possibly several more. Barbrady might not be stupid, he might be strategically useless, which is exactly what a town full of conspirators would want. The adults consistently fail to protect children from genuine danger while overreacting to trivial threats. They've sent children to war, they've exposed them to alien parasites. They've let them be kidnapped, tortured, and psychologically abused. And their response is usually to form a committee, make some speeches, and then forget about it. But let an inappropriate word show up on television and the entire town mobilizes. A child says a bad word and it's a crisis. A child is murdered by a cult member and it's Tuesday. The priorities reveal a community that cares more about appearances than safety, more about comfort than truth. Randy Marsh's role as patient zero for the COVID pandemic is another piece of this puzzle. He created the virus, he knew he created it, and the town's institutional response was to look everywhere except at Randy. The scientists traced the virus to a pangolin. They identified foreign DNA. They came tantalizingly close to the truth multiple times. But Randy kept destroying evidence, manipulating the investigation, and profiting from the disaster, and nobody stopped him. Nobody even tried, because in South Park, accountability is a foreign concept. The town doesn't punish its own, it resets, it moves on, and the next disaster is always just around the corner. The conspiracy isn't organized in the traditional sense. There's no shadowy council making decisions in a basement. It's more organic than that. It's a community that has collectively decided, without ever formally agreeing, that asking too many questions is worse than living with the answers. They've seen what happens to people who rock the boat. They've watched Kenny die 100 times and forgotten about it every time. They've endured alien invasions and dimensional portals and pandemic-level catastrophes. And they've survived by simply choosing not to think about it too hard. The silence isn't a plan. It's a survival strategy. If you're enjoying this series so far, don't forget to subscribe. Let's talk about Chef for a moment, because his departure from the show might be one of the most revealing moments in South Park's history, both inside and outside the fiction. Jerome McElroy, better known as Chef, was for years the moral heart of South Park. He was the school cafeteria cook, and he was the only adult in town who consistently treated the boys with genuine kindness and offered them real guidance. When the kids had questions about life, love, or anything confusing, they went to Chef. He didn't always give them perfect advice. His solutions often involved singing songs about making love. But he cared. He genuinely cared about these children in a town where almost nobody else did. Isaac Hayes, the musician and actor who voiced Chef, left the show in 2006 following a dispute over the show's treatment of Scientology. Hayes was a Scientologist, and when South Park aired an episode lampooning the religion, he objected and departed. The show's response was the season 10 premiere, The Return of Chef, in which Chef returns to South Park acting strangely, having been brainwashed by a group called the Super Adventure Club, a thinly veiled parody of Scientology that is also a front for child predators. Chef is killed at the end of the episode in spectacularly gruesome fashion, falling off a bridge, being mauled by a mountain lion and a grizzly bear, catching fire and being impaled. The boys mourn him, and Kyle delivers a speech saying they should remember Chef as he was, not as what he became in the end. Inside the show's mythology, Chef's departure represents the loss of the only genuinely protective adult figure the boys had. After Chef left, there was nobody in South Park who served that role. Nobody who would sit them down and explain the world to them with patience and affection. The guidance counselor, Mr. Mackey, is well-meaning but ineffective. The teachers are incompetent or unstable. The parents are neglectful or abusive, or in Randy's case, actively creating global catastrophes. Chef was the firewall between the boys and the worst impulses of the adult world. When that firewall fell, the show got darker, not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. The emotional temperature of South Park dropped after Chef left, and it never fully recovered. Under the purgatory theory, Chef was an angel, a soul assigned to guide the children through the chaos of this particular afterlife holding dimension, who was eventually pulled out of the system before his work was done. Under the mythology theory, Chef was the one adult who hadn't been corrupted by the town's collective silence. He cared about truth, he cared about the kids, and that made him incompatible with a community that runs on willful ignorance. Either way, his absence left a void that 20 seasons haven't filled. Now here's a theory that takes a completely different approach to the show's most unlikely romance. Tweak and Craig Tucker were paired together as a couple in season 19, episode 6, Tweak x Craig. The episode was a commentary on the yaoi fan art community, showing the town's Asian students drawing romantic artwork of Tweak and Craig as a couple, which pressures the two boys into a relationship they didn't initially choose. The joke was supposed to be about social pressure and performative identity. But something unexpected happened. The show committed to it. Tweak and Craig stayed together through subsequent seasons, through the COVID specials, through the post-COVID future. They're still a couple 40 years later. It's one of the longest-running relationships in the show's history. The fan theory that emerged from this is that the show accidentally stumbled onto something genuine. Tweak and Craig's relationship wasn't supposed to be real. It was supposed to be a satire of shipping culture and the way communities impose identities on people. But the writers discovered that the relationship worked, that these two characters, one anxious and overstimulated and the other deadpan and emotionally flat, balanced each other in a way that felt authentic. And rather than walk it back, the show leaned in. Tweak and Craig became one of the few functional, healthy relationships in the entire South Park universe. In the post-COVID future, Tweak and Craig are still together. They're adults. They're a stable couple. They're volunteered for a mission to find aluminum foil for a time machine, and they go together as partners without argument or drama. In a show where every other relationship is defined by dysfunction, manipulation, abuse, or abandonment, Tweak and Craig represent something the show almost never allows to exist. Genuine, lasting, uncomplicated love. And the fact that it started as a joke makes it even more meaningful. Sometimes the best things happen by accident, even in South Park. There's one more piece of South Park's supernatural infrastructure that deserves attention before we start wrapping up. The show has, over 28 seasons, established that the town of South Park sits at the center of an extraordinary concentration of supernatural activity. We've talked about the cult of Cthulhu, the government portal to Imagination Land, and Kenny's immortality cycle. But the full list is much longer than that. South Park has been visited by aliens multiple times. The visitors, as they're called, have been abducting and probing residents since the very first episode. Satan has physically appeared in South Park on numerous occasions, once to fight Jesus in a boxing match, and other times to conduct personal business with local residents. Jesus Christ lives in the town and hosts a public access show, Meka Streisand, a giant robotic version of Barbara Streisand, has attacked the town. Man-Bear-Pig, initially presented as one of Al Gore's delusions, turned out to be real and wreaked havoc. The woodland critters, who look like cute Christmas animals, turned out to be Satan worshippers who perform blood sacrifices. A portal to hell was opened in the town. Cthulhu was released from the ocean. The government built a stargate to another dimension. A mining operation drilled into a pocket of lava that released a creature called the Lava Monster. Scuzzlebutt, a monster Cartman invented as a campfire story, turned out to be real. No other town on Earth, in any fictional universe, attracts this level of supernatural activity. The theory that South Park is purgatory explains some of it. The theory that Imagination Land's barrier has been compromised explains more. But there's a meta-theory that encompasses all of it, and it's the one I want to leave you with. What if the concentration of supernatural events isn't coincidental and it isn't purgatorial? What if South Park itself is a nexus point, a place where the barriers between dimensions are naturally thin, where the line between imagination and reality has always been blurred, and where the normal rules of physics and mortality have never fully applied? This would explain everything. The alien visits, the demons, the monsters, the gods, the portals, the immortality, the time loops, all of it. South Park isn't cursed. It isn't purgatory. It's a crack in the foundation of reality. And the people who live there have adapted to it so completely that they don't even notice anymore. The government knows about the crack. That's why they built the Imagination Land portal in South Park's vicinity. That's why they monitor the town without intervening. That's why supernatural events keep happening and nobody at the federal level ever shuts the town down or evacuates the residents. South Park is useful precisely because it's broken. It's a laboratory for studying what happens when the walls between dimensions come down. And the residents, especially the children, are the test subject. This would explain why nobody ever leaves South Park permanently. Not because they can't, because they're drawn to the nexus. The supernatural gravity of the place pulls people in and keeps them there. Kenny's curse keeps recycling him back. The adults' inability to learn from their mistakes isn't stupidity. It's a feature of living in a place where reality itself is unstable. How can you learn lessons in a town where the rules change every week? How can you grow as a person in a place where time doesn't work correctly and death isn't permanent, and the government is running classified experiments on the fabric of reality just over the hill? The kids aren't immune to this, but they're more resilient. Maybe that's because they're younger and more adaptable. Maybe it's because their imaginations are stronger, which gives them a kind of natural defense against the dimensional instability. Or maybe, as the purgatory theory suggests, they're not ordinary children at all. They're something else entirely, placed in South Park for a purpose that even they don't fully understand. There's a theory about Stan Marsh that often gets overshadowed by the flashier theories about Cartman-Kenny, but it might be the most emotionally honest one of them all. The theory suggests that Stan Marsh is the character who most accurately reflects the show's worldview, and that his recurring bouts of depression and cynicism aren't character flaws or plot devices. They're the show's own emotional state projected onto the character who has always served as its moral compass. Stan has always been the straight man, the normal one, the boy who watches the chaos around him, shakes his head, and delivers the end of episode speech about what everyone should have learned. Kyle gets angry, Cartman schemes, Kenny dies, but Stan observes, he processes, he tries to make sense of things. And over the course of 28 seasons, the weight of all that processing has started to break him. Season 15, Episode 7, You're Getting Old, is the episode where this becomes impossible to ignore. Stan turns 10, and suddenly everything in his life starts to look and sound like excrement. Literally. Music sounds like farts to him. Movies look like garbage. His friends' interests seem pointless. His parents' marriage is falling apart. His dad is obsessed with whatever new trend is sweeping the town, and his mom has had enough. By the end of the episode, Stan is sitting alone in his room, surrounded by a world that has become physically repulsive to him, while Fleetwood Mac's Landslide plays over a montage of everything he's losing. The next episode, Asperger's, deals with the fallout. Stan is diagnosed with something the school calls being a cynical asshole, and he discovers that drinking alcohol makes the world look normal again. He finds a group of adults who have the same condition and who cope by drinking constantly. They're all functional alcoholics who discovered that numbness is the only alternative to seeing the world as it truly is. Stan joins them. He starts drinking. And for a brief, disturbing stretch, the show depicts a 10-year-old boy turning to alcohol as a coping mechanism for existential despair. And it works. The status quo is eventually restored. Stan's parents get back together. He and Kyle become friends again. The cynicism fades, but it doesn't go away entirely. In subsequent seasons, Stan occasionally displays a weariness and emotional flatness that the other characters don't share. He's the one who questions whether their adventures matter. He's the one who hesitates before jumping into the next scheme. He's the one who, in the post-COVID future, becomes a professional alcoholic living alone, talking to an Amazon Alexa, estranged from everyone he ever loved. The theory proposes that Stan's cynicism isn't a condition that gets cured. It's a realization that gets suppressed. Stan saw through the illusion. He perceived for a brief moment that the world around him is fundamentally broken, repetitive, and resistant to meaningful change. And then the show pulled him back, reset his chemistry, and restored him to a functional state. But the knowledge is still there, underneath the surface, quietly corroding his ability to believe in anything. This connects back to the time loop theory in an important way. If Kyle is the character who can feel the loop operating, Stan might be the character who emotionally reacts to it. Kyle's awareness is intellectual. He senses that time isn't working correctly. Stan's awareness is emotional. He feels that nothing he does matters, that the same patterns keep repeating, that growth is impossible. Kyle thinks about the loop. Stan suffers from it. And the show uses their different responses to explore two fundamentally different ways that people cope with a reality they can't change. Kyle tries to understand it. Stan tries to anesthetize himself against it. The post-COVID future validates this reading. Adult Stan drinks for a living. He's chosen a career that requires daily alcohol consumption, which means he's institutionalized the coping mechanism he discovered at age 10. The Alexa he talks to represents the artificial companionship of someone who has given up on real human connection. And his refusal to visit his father, his refusal to confront the truth about Randy's role in the pandemic, represents a man who has decided that looking too closely at reality is more than he can bear. Stan isn't lazy, he's not indifferent. He's protecting himself. Because the last time he saw the world clearly, it was covered in excrement. And the only thing that made it stop was drinking until the truth went away. If you're enjoying this series, don't forget to subscribe. South Park has a complicated and fascinating relationship with death that goes far beyond Kenny's running gag. Death, as a character, has appeared in the show multiple times, and each appearance reveals something about how the show's universe actually functions. And when you lay out all of the show's deaths, resurrections, and afterlife mechanics side by side, a surprisingly coherent cosmology emerges. Death, the personified entity, first appears in the show's early seasons. He's depicted as a robed skeleton who shows up to collect souls, but he's not particularly menacing. He's more like a bureaucrat. He has appointments to keep. He gets annoyed when things don't go according to schedule. He has a personal life. This characterization is important because it establishes death in South Park as an institutional function rather than a cosmic force. Death works a job. He follows rules. He answers to someone, which means the afterlife in South Park isn't random or chaotic. It's organized. It has a hierarchy, and that hierarchy can be exploited, manipulated, or circumvented by people who know how the system works. Kenny's immortality is the most dramatic example of circumvention. His parents attended a cult meeting, and now their son cycles through death and rebirth indefinitely. But Kenny isn't the only character who has cheated death. Cartman has died and been resuscitated. Stan has had near-death experiences. Characters across the show have died and returned through various mechanisms, including cloning, time travel, and what appears to be the sheer narrative refusal of the show to let go of certain characters. Satan, who exists as a major recurring character, adds another layer to the afterlife infrastructure. Satan in South Park is not a figure of pure evil. He's complicated. He's been in abusive relationships. He once dated Saddam Hussein, who treated him terribly, manipulating his emotions and cheating on him. Satan struggled with self-esteem issues and eventually found a healthier relationship. He's thrown house parties in hell. He's competed against Jesus in a boxing match. He's a fully realized character with emotional needs and personal growth, which is a strange thing to say about the literal devil. But that's the kind of show this is. The existence of Satan as a sympathetic character reinforces the purgatory theory. If the devil himself is a nuanced being who struggles with the same relationship problems as the humans in South Park, then the moral framework of the show's universe isn't a simple good versus evil binary, it's a spectrum. People aren't sorted into heaven or hell based on clear-cut rules. They end up wherever the system puts them, and the system is run by flawed, emotional beings who don't always make the right call. Purgatory in this framework isn't a punishment, it's a processing delay. A cosmic waiting room where souls sit until the afterlife bureaucracy gets around to figuring out where they belong. The show has also established that hell in its universe is real and has specific geographic properties. Characters have visited it, portals to it have been opened. It has been depicted as a physical location that can be accessed from South Park under certain conditions. Heaven exists too, though it's shown less frequently. The Super Best Friends, a team of religious figures including Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, and others, operate as a kind of supernatural Avengers team that intervenes in major crises. Their existence confirms that the divine realm of South Park's universe is as organized and bureaucratic as its infernal counterpart. All of this means that death in South Park isn't an ending, it's a transition. And transitions can be redirected, delayed, or reversed by anyone with the right connections, the right knowledge, or the right cult membership. Kenny's parents had cult connections, Cartman befriended Cthulhu, Butters became the chosen one of Imagination Land. Even the boys' ordinary adventures frequently brush up against the boundaries of life and death without anyone treating it as extraordinary. Because in South Park, death is ordinary. It's just another thing that happens, like getting grounded or watching your dad have sex with a pangolin. The show's casual treatment of death is both its funniest quality and its most disturbing. It teaches viewers, through repetition and humor, to stop taking death seriously, to laugh when Kenny is crushed by a piano, to move on when a character is shot or exploded or eaten, and then, very occasionally, the show pulls back the curtain and shows you what that casualness actually costs. Kenny alone in his room, knowing he just died and nobody cares. Butter sitting in an asylum for 16 years because nobody came back for him. Stan drinking alone in an apartment, mourning a version of the future that will never exist. The comedy is the surface, the tragedy is the depth. And the show trusts you to look past one and find the other if you're paying attention. Now let me bring all of these threads together with one final theory, and it might be the most important one. What if South Park isn't a literal depiction of events at all? What if everything we've been watching for 28 seasons is a mythologized retelling of childhood? The way the boys remember growing up, filtered through the imagination, the fears, the humor, and the confusion of kids trying to make sense of an adult world that doesn't make any sense. Think about the animation style first. South Park looks like construction paper cutouts. The characters are simple shapes with limited movement and exaggerated proportions. The backgrounds are flat, the color palette is basic. This isn't just a budget constraint from the early days that became a signature. It looks like a show made by children. It looks like the kind of thing a kid would create if you gave them scissors and colored paper and told them to make a TV show about their lives. And maybe that's not an accident. Now think about how adults are portrayed. Almost every adult in South Park is an idiot. They're selfish, hypocritical, emotionally unstable, and completely incapable of solving problems that children can see through instantly. They panic over minor threats and ignore major ones. They form committees and hold rallies and post on social media instead of actually doing anything useful. They're everything that a child thinks adults are, because children watch adults constantly. They study adult behavior the way anthropologists study foreign cultures. And what they see filtered through a child's understanding looks exactly like the adults of South Park. Big, loud, confident, and completely clueless. The supernatural elements make sense under this reading too. Children don't have a clear boundary between what's real and what's imagined. A child who hears about Cthulhu at school might genuinely believe there's a cult in their neighborhood. A kid who watches too many horror movies might see alien visitors in every strange shadow. A boy whose friend keeps getting hurt and recovering might develop a mythology around death and resurrection to make sense of something frightening and confusing. The monsters aren't real. The aliens aren't real. The portals and the demons and the talking Christmas poo aren't real. They're how children process a world that frightens them, translated into the visual language of their imagination. The I Learned Something Today speeches take on a beautiful new meaning under this theory. In every episode, one of the boys, usually Kyle or Stan, stands in front of whoever will listen and delivers a little moral lesson. These speeches are often earnest, sometimes naive, occasionally profound, and always slightly too articulate for a 9-year-old. They sound like a child trying to make sense of something an adult should have explained to them but didn't, because that's exactly what they are. The boys don't have chef anymore. They don't have reliable parents. They don't have teachers who care. So they figure it out themselves, and they summarize what they figured out in these little speeches that nobody in the adult world takes seriously. The show's loose continuity supports this reading. Childhood memories are vivid in spots and blurry in others. You remember the big moments, the scary moments, the funny moments, but the connective tissue between them is vague. Was that the year we went to Imagination Land, or was that the year Cartman started a cult? Did Kenny die before or after the whole pandemic thing? Childhood doesn't organize itself into neat seasons and episode numbers. It organizes itself into feelings and fragments and the stories you tell yourself about who you were. This theory doesn't diminish the show. If anything, it elevates it. If South Park is how 4 boys remember growing up in a small Colorado town, then every monster is a fear they couldn't name. Every disaster is a crisis they couldn't understand. Every supernatural event is the child's attempt to explain something that the adults in their lives refuse to explain. The show becomes a record of childhood itself, not as it actually was, but as it felt. Enormous, terrifying, hilarious, confusing, and populated by adults who seemed to have no idea what they were doing. And the friendship at the center of it, the friendship between Stan, Kyle, Kenny, and Cartman, becomes the one true thing. The one constant in a world of chaos and imagination and fear. They fight, they betray each other, they say terrible things. But they always come back. They always end up at the bus stop, waiting together, facing whatever comes next as a group. Because that's how childhood friendship works. It survives things that adult friendships can't. It bends without breaking. It forgives without forgetting. And it stays with you long after everything else about growing up has faded into the kind of story you tell yourself late at night when you can't sleep. There's one more theory about Cartman that we haven't touched yet, and it's one of the strangest. Throughout the show, Cartman has a recurring bit where he uses his hand as a puppet and gives it a personality. The puppet's name is Mitch Connor, and Cartman treats Mitch as a completely separate person. He talks to Mitch, he argues with Mitch, he consults Mitch on strategy. And here's the part that makes it genuinely unsettling. Other characters in the show also interact with Mitch Connor as though he's real, not just humoring Cartman, actually engaging with the puppet as an independent entity. The fan theory is that Mitch Connor isn't a bit, it's a dissociative identity. Cartman, who has experienced more psychological trauma than almost any other character in the show, has developed a genuine split personality that manifests through his hand. Mitch Connor is the part of Cartman that can handle the things Cartman himself can't process. The scheming, the long-term planning, the emotional compartmentalization required to murder your own father and not feel anything about it. Cartman is the front. Mitch is the operator. This theory gained traction during the 200 and 201 episodes, where Mitch Connor plays a significant role. A flashback shows Mitch Connor in Vietnam operating as a separate character with his own backstory and motivations. Now, the show plays this for comedy. Obviously, a hand puppet didn't serve in Vietnam, but the fact that Cartman has constructed an elaborate false history for his alternate personality, complete with wartime trauma and a code of honor, is exactly what you'd expect from someone whose psychological defense mechanisms have evolved into something more permanent. Mitch isn't a joke, Cartman tells. Mitch is a structure Cartman built to survive. In the post-COVID future, Mitch Connor doesn't appear. Adult Cartman, whether genuinely reformed or playing the longest con in history, seems to function as a single integrated personality. If Mitch was a dissociative response to childhood trauma, then his absence in adulthood could mean one of two things. Either Cartman genuinely healed and integrated the personality, which supports the theory that his Jewish conversion is sincere, or the personality was absorbed into Cartman's primary identity so completely that Mitch no longer needs to surface, which supports the theory that the conversion is the ultimate Mitch Connor scheme, running silently underneath Cartman's consciousness, controlling the play without anyone, including Cartman, knowing it's happening. Either way, Mitch Connor transforms Cartman from a sociopathic child into something more complicated and more pitiable. A boy so damaged by his environment, by the absence of his father, by the town's lies, by his mother's dysfunction, that his mind fractured and created a second self to carry the burden. Every terrible thing Cartman has ever done might not have been done by Cartman at all. It might have been Mitch. And Cartman, the real Cartman, the scared little boy behind the bravado and the schemes, might have been watching from somewhere inside, unable to stop it, unable to take control, unable to do anything except let the puppet run the show. There's another pattern in South Park that deserves its own analysis, and it ties together several of the theories we've already discussed. The show has a habit of introducing massive, status quo, altering events and then resetting everything to baseline within 1 or 2 episodes. Stan's depression is cured, Butter's trauma is forgotten. Randy's crimes go unpunished. The town is rebuilt after destruction. Characters who are fundamentally changed by their experiences snap back to factory settings, and the show continues as if nothing happened. Most viewers interpret this as a feature of episodic animation. Cartoons reset. That's what they do. But when you combine this pattern with the time loop theory, a much darker picture emerges. What if the resets aren't a storytelling convenience? What if they're happening inside the story? What if the characters are aware on some subconscious level that their experiences are being erased, their growth is being reversed, and their suffering is being wiped clean to make room for more? Consider what this would feel like from the inside. You go through something devastating. Your parents divorce. Your best friend stops talking to you. You watch someone you love get hurt. You learn something about the world that changes how you see everything. And then one day you wake up and it's all been undone. Your parents are back together. Your friend is at the bus stop. The lesson you learned has evaporated, and you can't remember why you feel a vague, persistent sense of loss that you can't attach to anything specific. You just know something is wrong. You just know that something was taken from you. But you can't prove it, and you can't articulate it, and nobody else seems to notice. That's the existential horror at the core of South Park's mythology. Not the monsters, not the cults, not the government conspiracies. The horror is the erasure. The horror is being trapped in a system that allows you to suffer but not to grow from it, that grants you experience but strips it of meaning, that lets you feel everything but remember nothing. Kenny dies and comes back. Stan breaks and heals. Butters is destroyed and reassembled. The town burns and rebuilds. And none of it sticks. None of it counts. None of it leads anywhere except back to the beginning. The "I learned something today" speeches are the most tragic element of this pattern. Every episode, one of the boys stands up and distills their experience into a moral lesson. They share it with whoever will listen. And then the lesson is erased. The speech is forgotten. The growth is reversed. Next week, the same mistakes will be made. The same suffering will occur. And the same lesson will need to be learned all over again. It's Sisyphus rolling his boulder up the hill, except Sisyphus is 9 years old, and the boulder is the collective stupidity of an entire town that refuses to change. But here's the thing about Sisyphus. Albert Camus said we must imagine Sisyphus happy. And maybe that applies to the boys of South Park too. Maybe the tragedy isn't that the lessons don't stick. Maybe the beauty is that they keep trying. Kenny dies and comes back and faces the next day. Stan falls into despair and pulls himself out. Kyle delivers another speech, knowing it won't change anything. Even Cartman, in his own twisted way, keeps engaging with the world, keeps scheming, keeps caring about things, even if the things he cares about are terrible. They don't give up. They never give up. And in a universe that is actively working to erase their progress and reset their lives and trap them in an eternal fourth grade, the simple act of showing up to the bus stop one more time is the most defiant thing they could possibly do. That's the grand unified theory of South Park. Not that it's purgatory or a time loop or a dimensional nexus or a childhood mythology. It's all of those things and none of them. It's a show about persistence in the face of meaninglessness, about friendship in the face of entropy, about 4 boys who keep standing at a bus stop in the snow in a town that has been destroyed and rebuilt 100 times, waiting for a bus that takes them to a school where they've been sitting for 28 years, and choosing to be there anyway, choosing each other anyway, every single day. Despite everything, and honestly, that might be the most disturbing truth of all. Not the cults or the curses or the conspiracies. The truth that even in a universe this broken, this absurd, this fundamentally hostile to growth and change and meaning, 4 kids still show up for each other. They still argue about stupid things at the bus stop. They still face the next adventure together. And they still, after 28 seasons of death and destruction and disappointment, believe that tomorrow might be different. That's not a theory, that's just South Park. Before we reach the final stretch of this deep dive, there's one more layer to the mythology that sits above all the others, and it's the one that fans debate the most passionately. It's the theory about what South Park thinks of you, the viewer, the person watching right now. Throughout the entire run of the show, there has been a show within the show, Terrence and Philip. 2 Canadian comedians whose entire act consists of farting on each other and laughing about it. The boys of South Park love Terrence and Philip. They watch it religiously, they quote it constantly. They went to war with Canada over it. Terrence and Philip is the most important piece of media in their lives, and it consists of nothing but 2 men passing gas. The meta theory is that Terrence and Philip is South Park's self-portrait. Trey Parker and Matt Stone created a show within their show that mirrors what their show looks like to outsiders. Crude, juvenile, repetitive, built entirely on shock humor and body functions. The boys love it the way South Park's audience loves South Park. The parents hate it the way parents in the real world have criticized South Park since it first aired. The government considers it a threat the way real-world critics have treated the show as culturally dangerous. Terrence and Philip is South Park looking in the mirror and choosing to laugh at what it sees. But here's where it gets more interesting. The boys who love Terrence and Philip are the same boys who navigate complex moral dilemmas, process genuine trauma, and deliver philosophical monologues about the nature of reality. Their love of fart comedy doesn't diminish their depth. It coexists with it. They contain multitudes. And the theory suggests that Parker and Stone are making a deliberate argument about their audience. You can love crude humor and also be a thoughtful person. You can laugh at fart jokes and also care about the deeper mythology. The two impulses aren't contradictory. They're human. South Park has always operated on this dual frequency. The surface broadcast is loud, crude, and designed to shock. The deeper signal is quiet, nuanced, and designed to reward patience. Most viewers pick up only the surface broadcast. They watch Kenny die, they laugh, they move on. But the fans who pick up the deeper signal, the ones who track the Cthulhu cult connections across seasons, who notice the Mephisto DNA falsification, who trace the Butters abuse pipeline from Professor Chaos to Victor Chaos, those fans are doing exactly what the show designed them to do. They're looking past the Terrence and Phillip layer and finding the South Park layer underneath. This is what makes the show's mythology so satisfying to explore. It's not an accident. It's not fans reading too much into things. Parker and Stone are two of the most intentional storytellers working in any medium, and they've been laying these threads for nearly 3 decades. They built a show that looks disposable on the outside and is architecturally complex on the inside, and they trusted their audience to discover the complexity on their own timeline. Some fans found it immediately. Some are finding it now, tonight, listening to this video while they fall asleep. And some will find it years from now, rewatching an episode they've seen a dozen times and suddenly noticing a connection they missed every time before. That's the final theory. South Park isn't just a show about 4 boys in Colorado. It's an experiment in audience engagement that has been running for 28 years. The crude surface exists to attract attention. The deep mythology exists to reward it. And the gap between the two, the space between the fart jokes and the philosophy, between Kenny dying and Kenny dying for something, between laughing at Cartman and understanding Cartman, that gap is where the real show lives. It's the space the show trusts you to find. And if you're still listening at this point, 2 hours into a video about South Park fan theories, then you already found it. You're already there. You've been there this whole time. Before we wrap up, I want to attempt something ambitious. I want to connect everything we've talked about tonight into a single unified reading of South Park. Because here's what I've noticed after spending this much time with the show's mythology. The theories don't contradict each other. They layer. They build on top of one another like geological strata. And when you step back far enough, a single picture emerges that is both incredibly dark and strangely beautiful. Start at the bottom layer. Kenny McCormick's parents, desperately poor and looking for any scrap of community or free food or alcohol, attend a Cult of Cthulhu meeting. They don't know what they're getting into. They're just 2 broke people in a small town trying to get through the night. And because of that decision, their unborn son is cursed with eternal death and rebirth. The curse is Lovecraftian in origin, connected to the cosmic entity Cthulhu, who exists in the dimension of Imagination Land, a parallel realm that the United States government has been secretly accessing through a classified portal called Project X. So Kenny's curse isn't random. It's connected to a vast supernatural infrastructure that extends from the poorest family in South Park all the way to the Pentagon. The curse has a side effect that nobody planned for. Kenny's death and rebirth cycle generates a temporal anomaly. Time in South Park doesn't work correctly. The residents age at a fraction of the normal rate. Technology and culture advance, but the people stay frozen. The boys have been in the 4th grade for nearly 3 decades. Kyle can feel the loop operating. Stan emotionally suffers from it. And the rest of the town has adapted so thoroughly to the anomaly that they don't even notice it anymore. They've normalized the impossible because the impossible is all they've ever known. This temporal instability is what makes South Park a nexus point for supernatural activity. The walls between dimensions are thin here. Aliens can get in, demons can visit, portals can be opened. The government knows about this and has been exploiting it for decades, building infrastructure to study and weaponize the dimensional instability, while the residents of South Park serve as unwitting test subjects. Mephisto's unregulated genetics lab, operating on a hilltop with no oversight, might be part of this program. His experiments, his cloning technology, his ability to falsify DNA evidence without consequences, all of it is suspiciously convenient for a town where the normal rules don't apply. And the authorities have decided that looking the other way is official policy. Within this framework, the Cartman paternity cover-up makes perfect sense. It's not just a small town protecting a football season, it's a community that has learned through decades of supernatural exposure and institutional neglect that the truth is dangerous and silence is survival. Telling Cartman who his father was would have disrupted the equilibrium. It would have raised questions that the town's conspiracy of silence couldn't afford to answer. So they let a child grow up without knowing his father, and when that child eventually murdered his father and fed him to his half-brother in a bowl of chili, the town absorbed the horror in silence. Because that's what South Park does. It absorbs, it resets, it moves on. Butterscotch represents what happens when the system fails a child completely. The town's adults are complicit, neglectful, and self-absorbed. The boys are trapped in a loop they can't escape. But Butters has no supernatural protection, no cosmic significance, no destined role in the town's mythology. He's just a kid, a sweet, trusting, fundamentally good kid who gets punished for everything, abandoned by everyone, and eventually breaks so thoroughly that nothing remains of the person he used to be. Victor Chaos isn't a villain origin story, it's a casualty report. Butters is what South Park does to the people who don't have plot armor. Randy Marsh is the town's ID. He's every selfish impulse, every reckless decision, every moment of willful ignorance that the adults of South Park collectively embody, concentrated into one man. He created a global pandemic by having sex with a bat. He covered it up, he profited from it, and he never faced consequences because the town doesn't do consequences. Randy isn't an exception to how South Park works. He's the purest expression of it. He's what happens when a community decides that comfort matters more than truth, and that accountability is someone else's problem. Mr. Garrison is the mirror. He reflects whatever America needs to see about itself at any given moment. And because America can't decide who or what it wants to be, Garrison can't either. He shifts identities the way the country shifts cultural norms, rapidly, dramatically, and without ever examining the underlying instability that makes the shifting necessary. He became president because the system allowed it. He caused chaos because the system rewarded it. And when the chaos subsided, nobody was held accountable, because in South Park, as in America, the next crisis always arrives before the last one is resolved. Stan Marsh is the canary in the coal mine. He's the character who feels the weight of everything the show is doing, who perceives the futility and the repetition and the moral entropy, and who responds the only way a child can respond, by breaking, by numbing himself, by deciding that if the world is going to look like excrement no matter what he does, then he might as well stop trying to make it look like anything else. Stan's cynicism isn't a phase, it's a diagnosis. He's the character who has the clearest view of what South Park actually is, and the view is destroying him. Kyle Broflovsky is the one who refuses to give up. He's the moral engine, the one who keeps making speeches, keeps standing up for what's right, keeps believing that if you just explain things clearly enough, people will change, and they never do. But Kyle keeps trying. Under the time loop theory, Kyle is the only character who senses the anomaly. Under the purgatory theory, he's the angel who takes his mission most seriously. Under the mythology theory, he's the friend who holds the group together through sheer force of optimism. In every reading, Kyle is the one who believes the cycle can be broken, and in every reading, the evidence suggests he's wrong, but he believes it anyway. And that might be the most human thing in the entire show. Eric Cartman is the wild card. He's the character who could be anything: a monster or a father, a sociopath or a penitent, a villain or a man who spent 40 years becoming everything his worst enemy valued just because he couldn't bring himself to say, "I love you." The post-COVID movies leave his story deliberately unresolved because Cartman is the show's way of asking whether people can change. Not whether they will change, whether they can. The capacity for transformation, the possibility of redemption. It's a question the show has been asking for 28 seasons, and it still doesn't have an answer. It might never have an answer, and that might be the point. And Kenny, poor, immortal, muffled, invisible Kenny, he ties it all together. His curse is the engine of the time loop. His poverty is the foundation of the show's social commentary. His deaths are the recurring joke that stopped being funny a long time ago, but keeps happening anyway because the system requires it. And his final act in the post-COVID future was to sacrifice his life trying to save his friends. Not the world, not humanity, his friends. Because in the end, that's all that ever mattered. 4 boys at a bus stop in a small mountain town, waiting for the school bus, arguing about something stupid, while the universe collapses around them and nobody notices. The beauty of South Park's mythology is that it works on every level simultaneously. It works as crude comedy, it works as social satire, it works as cosmic horror, it works as a meditation on childhood and friendship, and the way small towns protect their secrets and destroy their children. You can watch it and laugh at the fart jokes, or you can watch it and trace the interconnected web of cults, government conspiracies, dimensional portals, temporal anomalies, and institutional failures that make up the hidden architecture of this seemingly simple cartoon about 4 kids in Colorado. Both experiences are valid, both are intended. Trey Parker and Matt Stone built a show that rewards whatever level of attention you bring to it and punishes you a little for looking too closely. The fan theories we've explored tonight, from Kenny's Cthulhu curse to Cartman's accidental patricide, from the time loop to imagination land, from Butters' destruction to the purgatory hypothesis, from Randy's pandemic to the post-COVID future, from the Cartman-Kyle obsession to Kenny as a poverty allegory, from Garrison as America's mirror to the town's conspiracy of silence, from Stan's nihilism to the show's mythology as childhood memory. These aren't just speculation. They're evidence of a show that has been quietly building a mythology as rich and disturbing as anything in literary fiction. South Park doesn't get the credit it deserves for this. It hides behind toilet humor and cutout animation and the assumption that something this crude can't possibly be this deep. But it is. It has been from the beginning. And the fans who dig into these theories, who track the evidence across seasons and decades, who connect the dots the show never explicitly connects, are doing exactly what the show wants them to do. They're paying attention, they're looking past the surface, they're finding the tragedy underneath the comedy. That's the real secret of South Park, not the Cthulhu cult, or the government portals, or the time loop, or the purgatory. The real secret is that beneath 28 seasons of shock, humor, and profanity and animated children saying things no child should ever say, there is a story about 4 friends who can't live without each other in a town that is trying to destroy them in a universe that won't let them grow up. And they keep going. They keep showing up at the bus stop. They keep facing whatever insanity the next episode brings. Because that's what friendship does. It endures, even when the world doesn't make sense, even when the adults have failed, even when you've died 100 times and nobody remembers, especially then. And that wraps up our deep dive into the disturbing truth hiding behind South Park lore. We've traveled from Kenny's Cthulhu curse through Cartman's accidental patricide, from the time loop theory to the government's secret portal to imagination land. We explored how Dr. Mephisto falsified DNA evidence at the center of the town's biggest conspiracy, how Butters was systematically destroyed by every institution that should have protected him, and how the town itself might be operating as a form of purgatory for souls who can't quite figure out how to move on. We looked at how Randy Marsh personally caused a global pandemic and turned it into a business opportunity, how the post-COVID future revealed the true emotional stakes of the entire series, and how the connection between Cartman and Kenny might run deeper than friendship. We considered the possibility that Cartman's obsession with Kyle is the most complicated love story the show has ever told, and that Kenny's entire existence is an allegory for how poverty makes people invisible and disposable. We traced Garrison's transformation into a living political mirror, documented the town's conspiracy of complicit silence, and explored how Stan's nihilism might be the most honest emotional response to living in a world that refuses to change. And we ended with the theory that maybe, just maybe, all of it is a story. A story that four boys tell themselves about what it was like to grow up in a place that was stranger and scarier and funnier than anywhere else on Earth. A story told in construction paper and profanity, in fart jokes and philosophy, in the space between a child's imagination and an adult's despair. These theories demonstrate how creative fans can find hidden architecture even in a show that looks like it was made with scissors and a glue stick. South Park's mythology is darker, more interconnected, and more emotionally devastating than its surface has ever suggested. Beneath the crude animation and the shock value, there's a universe that runs on cult magic and government conspiracies, and the quiet, grinding cruelty of a town that eats its own children. And at the center of that universe, there are four boys, standing at a bus stop, waiting for a bus that takes them to a school where they'll never graduate, in a town they'll never leave, in a time loop that will never end. Whether Trey Parker and Matt Stone intended all of these connections or not, the evidence is there, hiding in plain sight across 28 seasons and 3 movies and a handful of specials that turned out to be the most emotionally devastating things the show has ever produced. The threads are real, the mythology is real, and the feeling you get when you follow those threads all the way to the end, that strange mix of amusement and sadness and awe, that's real too. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your own South Park theories. What did we miss? What connections have you found that we didn't cover? The mythology is deep enough that we could be here all night, and honestly, that was kind of the point. Thanks for watching, and sweet dreams.